Broadcasting live and worldwide. Here's Brodie Brazil.
All right, so this definitely qualifies as an emergency podcast. I would normally never put out 2 episodes in a row on back-to-back days, but I think the occasion is fully worthy of this following the news that we received earlier tonight. Now, full disclosure, I was off today. I was out in our garage doing some minor home improvement, electrical work to be specific. I had the impact driver in my right hand. I was putting a screw through a wall. I was mounting a junction box. And all of a sudden, my phone just starts buzzing in my pocket. And I thought the text messages were all coming from the same person. I thought it was a multitude of messages, either in one group chat or one person. It had to be, right? Like, what else is going on? And then all of a sudden, I take a glance at the screen, and there are a lot of different people trying to get a hold of me. And they're all saying the same thing. This is a possibility. It looks like this might be happening. And then not long after we get official confirmation, there is a new head coach of the San Jose Sharks. At this point, it was just to find out that Pete DeBoer had been dismissed. Later on in the evening, we learned that the interim head coach will be Bob Boughner. And so just to summarize what I'm doing here, I've realized in big events of the past, sometimes it's tempting to just jump on social media, start live streaming on Periscope or on Instagram, and just spew out all the thoughts that come first to your mind. But hopefully what you're going to get here in this podcast is a little bit better perspective, is a little bit deeper perspective now that the dust has settled, and now that I can kind of put together some pieces of what's happened, why it's happened, and what it all means moving forward. But as for just bringing it all back to the moment of finding this out, there's a lot of different words and feelings that go through my mind, how to describe initial reactions. And obviously one of them is saddened. It is okay to me to feel sad about this. Pete DeBoer, good guy, hard worker, his staff, they all meant very well. They had the highest of expectations, the highest of ambitions. And for it to end like this, it's unfortunate. This is a head coach that brought the team to a Stanley Cup final, their first ever, and to a Western Conference final, even as recently as earlier this calendar year. And I realize it took some heroics to get to round 3, right? Just to survive round 1. But all of that kind of put me in the mode of thinking that maybe Pete DeBoer and his staff, they had stacked up enough poker chips to weather a couple of the storms that the Sharks have endured so far this season. Obviously, that's not the case, but it brings me to other one-word descriptions. And was I surprised? Yeah, maybe mildly. Looking at this season, the inconsistencies, some really high points already, some really low points already. There's been a lot of season already in this young season, which is quickly turning into the mid-season point. Was I shocked by this? Not necessarily. If you watch the trends across the NHL, high-profile teams with high-profile coaches, big payrolls, big expectations, they're quick to make changes. Nowadays, more than ever. Look at the Toronto Maple Leafs for a recent example. But I think as I really struggle to find the right words to describe exact reaction here, intrigued is now kind of where we're at. I am so intrigued to find out what happens next with this hockey team. How do they react? How much of a difference does the change of head coach make in season? Where can they go from here? How can they be different? Will they look completely different starting Thursday night? I'm going to be honest with you. I think that's a lot to ask. I think they are capable of change. I think they're capable of much better. But I think it might take a little bit. Might take a couple weeks. Do they have that much time? Hopefully. And I think that goes into the decision-making of Doug Wilson and the front office of, timing. Can you let this go much longer without making a move? Like, the Sharks already dug themselves a pretty deep hole in October that they spent much of November getting themselves out of. And I'm telling you, if December went the same way as October, it is rough to survive January, and then February and March, getting ready for the playoffs in April. Like, you put yourself behind the curve, and good luck having any good chance in the Stanley Cup playoffs or even qualifying it, because you have to exert yourself so much down the stretch of the regular season just to make it to the playoffs. But just going back to maybe the surprise and the shock factor of this, I think the Sharks had shown us enough evidence of underperformance this season. And I'm not here to blame some of it or any of it or all of it directly on the head coach or anybody on the coaching staff. Right? I think the job of a coach at the professional level is to prepare the players. It's to also have some in-game management and showcase that. But as for execution, look, that's totally on the players in the moment, reading and reacting. A coach doesn't have that ability. They can lose their job because of it, but they don't have that ability to impact the game in that way. I'm thinking about the streaks that the Sharks have had. And over the course of a full 82-game regular season, right, it's not uncommon to look at a group and say, all right, they won 4 straight at one point, then they lost a couple more, then they won 9 of 10, or they lost 7 of 8, or they've lost another 6 of 8. The Sharks have literally started their season with a huge high, then a huge low, then another huge high, and now on a low. And just to recap, they lost 4 straight. Then they won 3 straight. Then they lost 7 of 8. Then they won 9 of 10 in November. And since then, they've lost 6 of 8. It's been a really hard group to figure out this season. And you look at just aspects of the team. One of the best penalty kills in the league. Yet also a defensive core, a defensive group. I don't mean to say D-men in general, just a team defensive effort that 5-on-5 is one of the worst in the league. How does that work? You're one of the best in the league shorthanded, but you go even strength and you struggle as much as anybody. And not to mention a power play that, seems to have all the right pieces, but has remained quite stagnant for a lot of different portions of the regular season so far. Just hasn't been able to produce. The Sharks have drawn these penalties, they've earned these opportunities, and just can't capitalize on the power play. So I also realize that's been a part of it, especially this past road trip when scoring went very, very dry. I also know that a reason and an aspect that people on the outside will look to when they try and put together the pieces of a coaching change is the goaltending stats, because they are not complementary at all. For Jones or Dell, the save percentage and the goals against average, to a lot of people, they tell a specific story. They have a lot of people believing that goaltending is it. Make a huge change in the crease, and all the problems are fixed. And I think you all know my perspective on this. I've said it before here on the podcast. We talk about it a lot on television, but not all shot chances are created the same. And save percentage, along with goals against average, obviously those are individually based stats, right? They go to a certain goalie. But they are so reflective of the team's effort in front of them. Think about basketball for just a second. What's like the shot conversion percentage of a layup versus a three-pointer? It's easy, right? Like layups in the NBA, it's probably like 90-something%. As for three-pointers, maybe it's high 20s, low 30s%. And the exact same thing happens in the NHL. You let shots through from the point or just inside the blue line, and a lot of times goalies are going to be able to see it. And I realize tips and redirects out front complicate the matter, but you allow shots from the inside, with unmarked opponents and cross-slot passes all the time and grade A chances right out front, what do you expect? Your goalies are both going to struggle. You think it's any coincidence that both Jones and Dell, their stats have gone south in the last year and a half? And we've been having this identical conversation now literally for the last year and a half. And a lot of people still think, they are so convinced that it's goaltending. I put it on Twitter that I thought that goaltending for San Jose was average plus and that team defense, I didn't want to be rude, but it's just not been good at all. A lot of people disagreed with that. A lot of people thought that, goaltending is the root of the problem. I think it's play without the puck. I think it's the turnovers and the chances and the opportunities that other teams are able to generate on San Jose, and what the Sharks don't get from their perspective on the other end of the ice the exact same way. And it's kind of interesting that what's happening here with the coaching change, it's a very common thread to goaltending itself. Like in a specific game, the team defense isn't going well. They don't, make Jones or Dell look good. And all of a sudden that goalie is pulled in favor of the other, right? So a person comes out of the game regardless of his individual faults or what he even had control over. And now we have a coach and a coaching staff that's being dismissed because, collective miscues by the team and losses have led to a coach being dismissed, regardless of where the fault truly lies. I also don't want to come across in saying that Jones or Dell have had flawless seasons or terrific seasons. I think average plus, and sometimes just average, is definitely a way to put it. And I think the real way to evaluate this, if you look at the stats and you watch all the games, you're probably right with me here. Watching the games and the eye test is where all of this comes to fruition. Because like I said, not all shot chances are created equal. But again, you're going to hear a lot of evaluations and breakdowns from people that maybe aren't watching all these games, that see the stats and see the numbers as a reason to point to of why this team has struggled. All right, so as for the coaching change midseason, the analogy I like to use in this case is it's like a parachute. You know it's there. It's the ripcord. You get one chance to pull it. And when you do, you're hoping that it just totally turns around the trends, right? You're not taking the free fall anymore. You pull that ripcord and you're in safe hands. Well, the Sharks at this point, you understand why that ripcord was tempting. Because all the work they did with 11 November wins, it kind of got erased in the first 11 days of December. So the timing, again, looking back, isn't necessarily overly surprising. But what I think is most important is now this. What happens next? Does this amplify where the team's at? Does it simplify the struggles they've had? Does it unify the team? A group that really does seem to have all the right pieces, but just can't get the results on any consistent basis. Like I said before, did they come out on Thursday night and look completely different? Did they have a jump in their step that no other move could have invoked besides this? And another thing to think about here is just the amount of weight on the shoulders of Bob Boughner right now as he takes over. Not just with the Sharks, but how about maybe the close and personal relationship he's always had with Pete DeBoer? DeBoer and company brought him back after he went to Florida, tried out being a head coach. It didn't work out, and he comes back to San Jose. So clearly the relationship has been there, and I just wonder what the phone calls or text messages have been like. And not to suggest anything wrong here, I'm just speaking from a sheer perspective of curiosity as a human being. That's an interesting dynamic that he's the only assistant coach retained and the one that is retained as such to take over the head coaching job with a couple new assistants. By the way, Roy Sommer, the Barracuda head coach, the longtime Worcester Sharks head coach, most wins in AHL history. Like, he has been a fixture of success in the San Jose organization. And now he's going to get this opportunity to come back to coaching at the NHL level. I think that's very cool. And circumstances aside, right? Like, it's a rough situation around the Sharks right now, but put that aside for just a second. I think it's very cool that he's being thrust into this opportunity at the NHL level. For Mike Ricci and Evgeny Nabokov, both players with long and storied backgrounds and histories in San Jose, both those guys extremely liked by the fans, but most importantly, I really feel like in the last 5-7 years, they've been around enough to learn the ropes of coaching, learn the ropes of being around from the other side of running a team, not the playing side, but the management side. And so now they're going to get opportunities. Roy Sommer is the associate coach, kind of like an assistant, maybe a little bit of a higher title. Ricci's going to be the assistant coach, and Nabby is going to be the goaltending coach. So I think, look, a lot of fans are excited about those names. Clearly, these are relatively new opportunities for these guys. I know they'll work hard at them. I know they've got a lot of great background for them. But we'll see how it goes. You'd have to imagine there's a certain amount of pressure to perform. And yeah, they didn't have an entire off season. They didn't have a training camp to get ready for this. It's kind of like, hey, here's the fire, jump in, let's go. So you kind of have to take that with whatever happens, but that's the way it's going, and we'll see what they can produce. So that's it for San Jose. And again, you think about Doug Wilson's quote, when you have had a level of success in the past, change is never easy, but we feel this team is capable of much more than we have shown thus far, and that a new voice is needed. What's going to happen here? Like some NHL teams have turned it around on a dime. Talked about the St. Louis Blues before. Other teams have had great success when they make a change like this. It's always been interesting because the Sharks, really in the last 10 to 15 years, they've enjoyed so much stability from a head coaching perspective. And you watch other teams make changes and say, wonder how that's going to work out. Well, guess what? Now that's us. Now that's the San Jose Sharks. So if you weren't already dialed into this season, if you weren't already fully invested, now is where it's going to get really, really interesting. So I can't wait for Pregame Live on Thursday and all the games coming up the rest of December. A 7-game homestand kicking off here. So a lot of home cooking and a lot of opportunity to see what this team looks like and how they can change up close and personal in person at SAP Center. All right, that does it for this emergency edition of the podcast. I'm Brodie Brazil. Until next time, yes, that is my real name.